Imagine waking up to find out that the most ruthless, unstoppable empire on Earth is sailing across the sea right now, and they have one single goal: to burn your city to ashes. Well, that was the terrifying ticking clock nightmare that Athens faced over 2,000 years ago. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're stripping away the myths to uncover the breathless survival story of the Battle of Marathon. Because honestly, this one desperate gamble is pretty much the only reason Western civilization even exists today.
So rewind to just 3 days before the battle. Athens is literally holding its breath. But then, these burned, completely exhausted survivors from the nearby city of Eretria stumble through the gates, and the news they bring is just horrific. We're talking burned temples, citizens dragged away in chains. Panic instantly spreads through the Athenian streets like wildfire. You've got merchants abandoning their stalls, families frantically dragging whatever belongings they can carry up to the Acropolis. The Persian terror they'd all heard about, it's finally here.
And then the nightmare becomes a reality. A scout thunders into the city streets, pushing his horse to the absolute limit. His message? The Persian fleet has just landed at a bay called Marathon. The crowd just freezes, because every single Athenian knows exactly what Marathon means. There are absolutely no walls between that landing beach and their front doors. The road to Athens is wide open. When the scouts finally get a good look at the enemy, the numbers they report back are just staggering. They're looking at up to 25,000 Persian infantry and 1,000 highly trained cavalry. I mean, it's a literal sea of ships and soldiers. To put that into perspective, the entire fighting force of Athens is a tiny fraction of that size. For those Greek soldiers looking down from the hills, it must have felt like staring at the end of the world.
That night, the 10 Athenian commanders huddle in a tense council to make an impossible choice. Now, half of them want to play it safe, lock the gates, wait behind the walls, and endure a long siege, which, realistically, just means slowly starving to death. But then you have a commander named Miltiades, and he's fiercely arguing for something completely unthinkable. He wants to march out to Marathon and face this massive army in the open. Basically, do you choose a slow death or a fast one? What would you do?
You can just imagine the suffocating tension in that command tent. The vote comes down to a dead tie. 5 commanders vote for battle, 5 vote against. So the entire fate of the city rests on the shoulders of one man, the polemarch, Callimachus. Miltiades looks him in the eye and warns him that if they wait, paranoia and fear are going to tear Athens apart from the inside before the Persians even draw their swords. Callimachus takes a long, heavy pause and delivers 2 words that literally change human history. We march.
Right at dawn, roughly 10,000 Athenian hoplites march out, shoving past terrified civilians fleeing the other way. But a few hours into the march, they see this dust cloud on the horizon. It turns out to be 1,000 men from the small neighboring city of Plataea. They had sent literally every soldier they could spare. And look, they didn't expect to win. They just completely refused to let Athens face this war machine alone. So with their line bolstered just a bit, the Greeks take the high ground at Marathon and stare down at the sprawling enemy camp.
Now, the Athenians know they need a miracle, right? So they dispatch their absolute fastest runner, a guy named Phidippides, on a grueling 240-kilometer sprint to beg the legendary Spartans for reinforcements. But the news he brings back is a total gut punch. Sparta actually wants to help, but strict religious laws during their Carneia festival tie their hands. They legally cannot march until the next full moon. That means days of waiting. Athens is completely, terrifyingly on its own.
What happens next is this agonizing, nerve-shredding stalemate. The heavily outnumbered Greeks, gripping these massive bronze shields, block the narrow dirt roads leading inland. Miltiades knows the math here is simple. Just hold the road until the Spartan festival ends. But every single morning, the Greeks are forced to watch the Persian cavalry running deadly drills on the plain below. It's a constant, terrifying reminder that stepping out of those hills means absolute slaughter.
But then, suddenly, everything changes. Greek sentries up in the hills spot some frantic movement down by the surf. Horses are being led into the water, ships are moving around. A scout comes running up with a completely chilling realization. The Persian cavalry camps are empty. The absolute deadliest weapon in the Persian arsenal is being loaded onto those ships. The big question is, why?
Well, Miltiades instantly realizes they have a tiny, fleeting window of opportunity. Without the enemy cavalry there to flank them, he pitches this insanely risky tactical gamble. Step 1, they thin out their own center, stretching their line dangerously wide so they don't get surrounded. Step 2, abandon formation and literally charge downhill right into deadly archer fire. Step 3, pray the heavily armored Greek wings can crush inward on the Persians.
But here's the catch. If that weakened center breaks too fast, the entire Greek army gets annihilated on the spot. They give the order. The Greeks lock their shields and start this slow, steady march forward. But the second they step into the kill zone of the Persian archers, they do the unthinkable. They speed up. Imagine an entire army of heavily armored men breaking into a terrifying, full-blown sprint right into a massive hail of arrows. The Persians must have thought they were completely insane. The distance closes violently fast, and with this deafening roar, a solid wall of Greek bronze crashes head-on into the Persian line. The sheer, brutal violence of that initial impact actually staggers the Persians. But Miltiades's gamble immediately starts showing its terrifying flaw. You see, the Persians kept their absolute best, most elite shock troops right in the middle of their formation. Under that kind of crushing pressure, the intentionally thinned-out Greek center starts to buckle. Dust is exploding everywhere as the hoplites get violently shoved backwards. And then the terrifying cry rings out over the battlefield. The center is giving way. For a second, it really looks like Athens is going to bleed to death right there in the dirt. But this is where strict discipline saves the day. While the Greek center is collapsing, those heavily armored Greek wings are absolutely devastating the lighter infantry on the Persian flanks. The Persian sides totally shatter. Now, normally, an army would chase a fleeing enemy, right? But the Greek wings execute this flawless, completely lethal maneuver. They stop, they pivot, and they turn completely inward. The trap is sprung. Suddenly, the victorious Persian center finds itself flanked on both sides by impenetrable walls of bronze. The whole dynamic of the battle shifts in a heartbeat. The Persian center goes from this triumphant breakthrough to being crushed in a literal vice grip. It's total compression, just unprecedented confusion and absolute panic. Their formation completely folds in on itself. This legendary, supposedly invincible imperial army breaks and scrambles in pure terror toward the water. The Greeks hunt them right into the surf, cutting them down in the shallows, and desperately grabbing at the wooden hulls to keep the ships from launching. It's an unbelievable, miraculous victory. But as the exhausted, blood-soaked Greeks watch those surviving ships row away, Miltiades looks south. A scout points toward the horizon, and everyone's stomach just drops. The fleet is turning toward Athens. They aren't retreating. They're sailing straight for the unprotected city. And remember that missing cavalry? Yeah, they're already on those ships. If that fleet reaches Athens before the army does, the victory on this beach means absolutely nothing.
So there is literally no time to celebrate, no time to rest, drink water, or even mourn the dead. These heavily armored, completely exhausted Athenian soldiers have to instantly turn around and start a desperate, forced march all the way back home. It's a literal race against the wind. Pushing their bodies so far beyond the limits of human endurance, under a brutal sun, they know their families and their entire way of life depend on beating those Persian sails to the city gates.
After hours of pure, agonizing effort, they actually make it. When the Persian fleet finally arrives offshore, ready to burn an undefended city to the ground, they look toward the shoreline and realize they're too late. The exact same army that just decimated them on the beach is already standing there, waiting for them. Armed, organized, still standing. The Persian commanders stare at that unbroken Greek line, calculate the odds, and slowly turn their ships away. Against all odds, Athens is saved.
The psychological shockwave from this one single day completely rippled across the ancient world. Think about it. For the very first time in history, a Greek army met the mighty Persian Empire in open battle and actually won. The myth was broken. Persia was no longer this invincible god force. They were mortal. Even the fearsome Spartans, who finally show up days after the battle, walk along the blood-soaked beach and quietly acknowledge the absolute impossible feat the Athenians had just pulled off.
But, the story doesn't just end here. King Darius eventually dies, and he passes this burning, obsessive thirst for vengeance down to his son, Xerxes. 10 years later, the empire is going to return with an invasion force so massive it practically defies comprehension. And they for sure won't be stopped on an open beach this time. The next time the Greeks face the wrath of the Persian Empire, it's going to be in a narrow, bloody pass. So what happens when an unstoppable force meets 300 Spartans? Well, that is a story for our next explainer. Thanks so much for diving into history with us today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next one.